This is sort of an add-on to the last video, so this won't be very long. When I talked about how we recycle essentially the same slavery through one generation to the next, right? And how is it they can't get the speed of their learning up to be able to break through using their holographic, hyperdimensional, creative imagination, which to do that went in a higher speed frequency, right? And I mentioned about density consciousness, right? And I didn't mention the other sort of important part of all that, although I think I did in a previous video. But I wanted to make sure that it didn't get lost in translation, which deals with cellular memories, the membrane, the memory and the chip, right? And how that is incorporated into the female mitochondria from the first mother to every generation that is after that, right? So now we're into bloodline and genetics. Okay, because that does play a big part. It's one of the reasons why the reptilians and the hybrids deliberately abuse their children, because they don't want the central nervous system, the chemical messengers, if you will, to activate the creative imagination, the mammal, what I call a Neo. Remember Neo in the Matrix, how much love he had for his girlfriend, etc., right? Expand the light, the creative imagination, anything is possible, infinite imagination, right? Because they perceive the cosmos through the lens of a predator, which essentially means that when you realize that you have a target on your back, and even Hunter Biden mentioned in one of his text messages that his father essentially helped facilitate a target on his back, okay? Because that's how it's going to be, okay? When you deliberately choose to harm another being, you just created an enemy, right? What I do to you, I do to me. You drain their energy. Now, obviously, if you do that to me, because I live in a state of peace, I will simply boost my energy back up. It doesn't mean I'm going to represent what you are by doing back to you what you did to me. Okay? I covered that on a previous video. Okay? That's how we lose our own light. So in your state of consciousness, your living spirit knows how this works. I'm not going to become and use the energy by which you use yours to essentially be what it is that you are, because I'm not what you are. I don't use my energy the way that you do. I live through my heart. That's my protection. Okay? When you have a strong, highly magnetic shield around your bubble, your circle of light, that's your protection. Okay? That's your power center. Okay? That's how we move through the cosmos. Which raises the state of consciousness, which raises our state of awareness. What's possible out there to experience. That's freedom. Okay? That's what liberates your state of consciousness, your living spirit, your soul. Okay? So this is just a physical DNA assembly that the spirit uses as a communications platform in this density. Okay? So I perceive things sort of a little bit differently. So in many ways, your state of consciousness, by the speed at which you're learning, means that the DNA, the living DNA in your body, is essentially, it becomes symmetric or synergized, okay? So which means all of the DNA codes that are lit up like an 8-day clock, you're lighting them all up. So as you're learning through higher knowledge, through bigger, more powerful spirit, by seeking the knowledge through gods and goddesses as you go on, then that is incorporated into your DNA as part of your record. That's your film strip. That's your coursework, okay? So the DNA, given a lifespan cycle, becomes the record of your experiences while you were here based on the speed of your learning and what you learned, because everything is intention. With me, it's intention. I experience things upon which I both learn and use from a teacher's perspective to put on the record of what's learned from these experiences in order to do what? Advance the speed and the frequency of what we're learning through every dimension. Okay? Which is like learning how it works, how we can expand more light, raise the higher frequency perception in every dimension, so that more species, more beings, in the evolution and speed of their learning, can experience more of the heavenly realms in a higher speed, which means in less time. Now we're dealing with hyperspeed learning from the first dimension all the way up. So I only mentioned partly the relationship I had with my wife, okay, back in the mid 1970s actually. But the importance of this can't be understated because her mother, she was pure Hungarian. I can't remember her bloodline except that she mentioned to me she was a gypsy, okay, and I didn't do any research. I did a little bit about gypsies, but I didn't go extensively into the bloodline genetics. But what I became familiar with is finding out that her mother was a radio operator in the underground, which were known as freedom fighters. Okay, if you remember your history in 1957, when essentially a rebellion took place in Budapest, my former mother-in-law was a radio operator with what were known as the freedom fighters. So she shared all of her experiences with me about what it was like to live under the bootstrap, okay, of communist Soviet Union, where she mentioned to me how living in a tenement building, for example, where 12 families shared the same toilet and shower, where she went to work in a factory every day, which means when they are measuring the skill sets of children, the state, because it's controlling the means of production, will decide the best use of your child based on your child's abilities. So you don't have any choice in where you're going to work. You go where they put you based on your skill sets. Much like in the military, when you enlist in the military go, wow, man, you can have any job that you want. You've got an enormous amount of aptitude, which means you have a high state of awareness in which the speed at which you're processing information, be aware of how things are put together, okay, which means function. The speed of your learning. Wow. Heck, what do you want to go into? You're already a genius. See? You can go here or go there. Well, in the Soviet Union, based on your skill set, is where you got put, which means you didn't have any choice. You couldn't use your own creative imagination to create your own reality with, write your own stories, create your own music. See? So in other words, higher speed liberates your state of consciousness, liberates your spirit. That's the genius in the cosmos, okay? That's self-evident, okay, through experience. So when she mentioned me all the experiences, like having to put cardboard in her shoes all the time, because she never had enough money to buy shoes. So she used to tell me when they busted out of there, her and her husband at the time made it into a refugee camp into Austria and then made it into Germany. And then they made it to America where they learned how to speak English and they passed their citizenship test. And then her husband got a dealership to fix Porsches and Volkswagens, and they moved to Southern California, and that's where I met them. She actually was working, she was in high school, senior in high school. When I met her, I was introduced to her parents. So you know that people who were raised and who are Eastern European in case do not live by the same cultures that they do here in America. Their standards are actually, when it comes to education, relationships between a male and a female are not the same. Okay, they're more birds and the bees, more nature-oriented, even though, because her mother had experienced living under the thumb or the boot, the jackboot, which is essentially the same, Dracos, okay? Particularly when you trace the bloodline genetics of Stalin, Hitler, okay? The Han Dynasty in China, you can pretty much put it together across the planet, okay? Rothschilds, for example, the Vatican, okay? They're religious institutions. Who the Anunnaki are, who the Draco are, who the Nazis are, who the Greys are, who the Archons are, who the Tall Whites are. Putting together their alliance, if you will. So in this particular case, her mother instilled in her daughter, okay, the importance of money and materialism, okay? And that was because of her experiences. This is tied directly into a famous Dutch study, and I can't remember exactly when it was done, but they were trying to figure out, for example, why a woman in the 1990s who had enough money to buy up pretty much whatever she wanted was always hoarding things, like what we call pack rats, like using all of her money to acquire so much stuff in material form that when you think of how that's translated in a money system means that she's always got a lot of stuff that she can always sell to make sure she never runs out of electrons, never runs out of currency. So they perceive the cosmos through the world of money, running out of energy. I don't want to run out of energy. So I see the cosmos not through spirit, but through matter. Okay? Matter density. So her experiences were teaching her to do what? Be inverted. Believe that the world is matter. Matter density perception. I want to be heavier density matter. Not lighter in spirit. Lighter in density consciousness. They were programmed through experiences, through trauma, to program their own unconscious memory, to want to stay in heavier density matter. What does that do? Allows a vampire and a demon to feed on you as a perpetual source of energy, to strip the soul out of you and use it as food. Okay? That's why her and I separated. Because I don't perceive the cosmos through matter. I perceive the cosmos in spirit, to move as fast as I possibly can in frequency, to expand more light in every dimension, so that beings don't have to experience what we experience in this dimension. Okay? That's why we're in here. Is to share our experiences, share our strength, share our hope, to eliminate all the pain and suffering. That comes through knowledge. Knowledge that comes through the light and living spirit. The divine light in which love is, that lasts forever, that represents what we are, that we share with everyone. We don't charge anybody for anything. That's why it was such a challenge for me as a child, knowing that I was going to be stuck in here for this life cycle, okay? When I don't want to hold on to anything. Where my state of consciousness is free to manifest and create through my infinite imagination what it is I thus experience and share with the cosmos. That's a radical difference than what I experience in here. Having an interface with so many beings, if you will, in which they want to hold on to everything that they have because they don't want to run out of energy, because they fear losing energy as a result of inverted programming of the unconscious memory and operating system at the cellular level. Which is why it was explained for that one particular woman in the 1990s, why was she hoarding? They tied it directly back to her grandmother in World War II as a result of the famine that she experienced. That loss of energy that was experienced that caused pain and suffering and emotional trauma was passed on to the future generations of the soul that came into that body, that then began holding on to an enormous amount of matter density, not realizing that the source from which that came was from a previous generation along the female mitochondria. Okay? So that needed to be imparted so that we understand sort of the genetic and the cellular memory side of things when we're talking about coursework, and how, for example, when one life cycle of an incarnate being who's doing coursework gets passed on to the next one, and how previous generations of having their energy fed on is slowing down the process of a student to evolve and ascend. That's why I had the conversation that I did 2 years ago, that beings were prevented from being able to ascend with the speed of their learning as a result of their consciousness being held captive to something that is feeding on their energy, preventing them from ascending. Which meant that the classroom was wrecked. When love is a law in a classroom, when beings came in here as students, they didn't experience that energy. Instead, they were experiencing demons. So how are they going to learn through demons to ascend and grow their spirit light body? They're not. So they did everything they could to not only degrade the genetics, but prevent students from being able to make a spiritual connection with a girl on the planet by all the poisons and the toxins, particularly going after the pineal gland. How are they going to be able to have a spiritual communication relationship with a teacher to ascend if they can't have a relationship with her? So this had to get sorted out, right? That's right. Other classrooms. Because of the amount of damage that was done here, and the amount of work that's being done now to correct that. Anyway, have a beautiful day. I got to hydrate. I hope you're all doing well. Everything's going to be just fine, okay? There's enough light in here to light up the universe. Bye now.